The scorching sun beat down on Concordia. Kansas, like God himself, had a personal vendetta against the small frontier town. Temperance Walker wiped sweat from her brow as she dismounted from the stagecoach, her trousers and men's cotton shirt drawing immediate stares from the townspeople gathered outside the general store. It was the summer of 1878, and while the rest of the women wilted in their heavy skirts and corsets, Temperance had long ago decided she would rather face scandal than heatstroke. "Miss, I believe you've made some mistake with your attire," a woman whispered, her face pinched with disapproval. "The dressmaker is just down the street." Temperance straightened her back and adjusted her wide-brimmed hat. "No mistake, madam, just common sense." The journey from Philadelphia had been long and grueling, but Temperance hadn't come all this way to turn back. Her uncle's letter had been clear: he was dying, and had left her his small ranch just outside of Concordia. Being an unmarried woman of 24 with no prospects, and recently dismissed from her position as a schoolteacher for her unorthodox views, the inheritance was her only hope for independence. "Miss Walker," a deep voice called from behind her. Temperance turned to find a tall man leaning against a hitching post. His tanned face was partially hidden beneath a worn leather hat, but she could see sharp blue eyes studying her with curiosity rather than judgment. His shoulders were broad beneath a faded blue shirt, and a star-shaped badge gleamed on his chest. "Sheriff Vincent Sinclair," he said, pushing himself upright and extending a hand. "Your uncle asked me to meet you and escort you to the property." Temperance hesitated before accepting his handshake. "I appreciate the gesture, Sheriff, but I'm perfectly capable of finding my own way." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Never said you weren't, Miss Walker. But it's 5 miles out of town, and I reckon you might appreciate a guide, seeing as you're new to these parts." As they spoke, Temperance became aware of the growing number of whispers around them. Women huddled in groups, their fans working furiously as they pointed and gossiped. "Is something the matter?" she asked the sheriff, though she knew precisely what was causing the commotion. Sheriff Sinclair's gaze traveled down to her trousers and back up to her face. "Nothing worth mentioning," he said simply. "Got your bags?" Within minutes, they were in a wagon heading out of town. Temperance sat stiffly beside the sheriff, preparing herself for the inevitable lecture about propriety and feminine modesty she'd heard countless times before. "Must be difficult traveling in this heat," he commented instead, eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead. "Less difficult in trousers than it would be in layers of petticoats and corsetry," she replied defensively. To her surprise, Sheriff Sinclair chuckled. "Can't argue with that logic. My sister Clara says the same thing, though she only wears her brother's clothes when she's helping with the cattle and far from prying eyes." Temperance studied his profile, trying to determine if he was mocking her. "Most men find it offensive when women dress practically." "Most men have never worn a dress in July in Kansas territory," he replied. "Wear what makes you comfortable here, Miss Walker. Life's hard enough in these parts without fighting your own clothing." The simple statement, delivered without judgment or condescension, caught Temperance off guard. She'd been preparing for battle since the moment she stepped off that stagecoach, ready to defend her choices as she had back east. The lack of resistance left her momentarily speechless. "My uncle mentioned you in his letters," she said finally. "He seemed to hold you in high regard." The sheriff nodded. Jasper was a good man, stubborn as a mule but fair. Town won't be the same without him. I only met him once when I was a child. He visited Philadelphia after my father died. Temperance gazed at the endless prairie stretching before them. "His letters these past few years were my only connection to family." "He spoke of you often," Sheriff Sinclair said, proud of his educated niece, said you had more backbone than most men he knew. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. I'm afraid my backbone cost me my teaching position. How's that? Temperance hesitated. I encouraged my female students to consider careers beyond marriage and motherhood. The school board found this unsuitable. Sheriff Sinclair turned to look at her fully, those blue eyes assessing her with newfound interest. Sounds like you'll fit right in with the Walker spirit. Jasper never did care much for others' expectations either. As they crested a small hill, a modest ranch came into view. It wasn't large by Western standards, a small cabin, a barn, and some fenced pastures with a few dozen cattle grazing lazily in the distance. A windmill creaked slowly in the afternoon breeze. It's not much, the sheriff said, but the land is good, and the water table's higher here than most places. It's more than I had yesterday, Temperance replied honestly as they pulled up to the cabin. Sheriff Sinclair jumped down and came around to offer her assistance. Temperance ignored his outstretched hand and climbed down herself, earning another one of those amused half-smiles that she was starting to find irritatingly attractive. The place has been looked after by Jasper's ranch hand, Miguel Hernandez. Good man, works hard. He lives in that small cabin beyond the barn with his wife, Elena. They'll help you get settled. Temperance nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was alone in Kansas, with a ranch she had no idea how to run, in a town where she'd already caused a stir before speaking more than 10 words. What if I can't do this? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Sheriff Sinclair considered her for a long moment. Jasper wouldn't have left you this place if he didn't think you could handle it. Besides, folks around here help their neighbors. It's how we all survive. Even scandalous women in trousers, she asked, a hint of bitterness in her voice. Especially them, he replied with unexpected gentleness. They tend to work twice as hard to prove themselves. With that, he tipped his hat and climbed back onto the wagon. I'll be by tomorrow to see how you're settling in. Miguel will help you with anything you need tonight. As she watched him drive away, Temperance felt a curious mixture of trepidation and hope. Perhaps in Concordia, Kansas, where the land demanded practicality above all else, she might finally find a place where she could be judged by her character rather than her clothing. The cabin was simple but solid. 2 rooms, a main living area with a cast iron stove and a small bedroom in the back. Jasper's personal effects were few. Some books, a rifle above the fireplace, photographs in simple frames. One showed a much younger Jasper with a woman Temperance assumed was her aunt, who had died before Temperance was born. Another showed Jasper with a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, fishing by a stream. A knock at the door interrupted her exploration. A middle-aged Mexican man stood there, hat in hands, with a kind face and work-worn hands. "Miss Walker," he said with a slight accent, "I am Miguel Hernandez. Your uncle was a good man and a fair employer. My wife and I wish to offer our condolences." "Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. I appreciate your care of the property in my uncle's absence." Miguel nodded. "Elena has prepared a meal for you. May she bring it?" "That's very kind, but unnecessary. It is our way," Miguel said simply. "And you must be hungry after your journey." Temperance smiled, suddenly aware of her empty stomach. "Then I accept with gratitude." Elena arrived minutes later with a pot of fragrant stew and fresh tortillas. She was a short woman with a round face and quick, dark eyes that took in Temperance's attire without comment. "You will need strength for ranch work," Elena said, placing the food on the small table. "Your uncle, he teach you about cattle?" "No," Temperance admitted. "But I'm willing to learn." Elena nodded approvingly. "Good. In those clothes you can work." The women in town, in their fine dresses, they could not last one day doing what needs done here. The simple acceptance in Alina's practical assessment made Temperance feel more welcome than any formal greeting could have. As night fell over the prairie, she sat on the small porch, watching stars appear in numbers she'd never seen in Philadelphia. The vastness of the landscape was both terrifying and exhilarating. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but for tonight, she would allow herself to feel the first tentative stirrings of belonging. Morning came with birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. Temperance dressed quickly in her most practical clothes: trousers, a light cotton shirt, and boots. She was attempting to start a fire in the stove when Miguel appeared at the door. "Miss Walker, the cattle need checking. Would you like to learn?" And so began her education as a rancher. Miguel was patient but firm, showing her how to approach the cattle, what to look for in terms of health and behavior, and how to move among them safely. By midday, Temperance was exhausted, filthy, and more alive than she'd felt in years. "You learn quick," Miguel commented as they headed back to the cabin. "Jasper would be proud." "I hope so," Temperance said, pushing back her hat to wipe sweat from her forehead, "though I suspect I've only scratched the surface of what I need to know." They were approaching the cabin when she spotted a familiar wagon. Sheriff Sinclair was seated on her porch, conversing with Alina. He stood as they approached, and Temperance became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, dirt-streaked face, hay in her hair, and clothes stained with dust and sweat. "Miss Walker," he greeted her, his blue eyes taking in her appearance with an appreciative glance that caught her off guard. "I see Miguel's wasting no time putting you to work." "The ranch doesn't run itself," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "No, it surely doesn't." He smiled, and Temperance noticed for the first time the slight dimple in his left cheek. "I've brought some supplies from town. Figured you might need provisions until you get your bearings." "That's very considerate, Sheriff." "Vincent," he corrected. "Or Vince. Sheriff feels mighty formal for neighbors." "Temperance, then," she replied, finding herself warming to his easy manner despite her resolve to maintain professional distance. Alina appeared with a pitcher of cool water and cups for everyone. "Miss Walker is a natural with the cattle," she reported proudly. "Not afraid of hard work." Vincent nodded as if this confirmed something he already suspected. "Jasper always said the Walker women had grit. Said his sister, your mother, I assume, once stood down a charging bull with nothing but a parasol and sheer stubbornness." Temperance laughed, surprised. "That sounds like Mother, though she never told me that particular story." "Well, seems the trait runs in the family," Vincent said, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. Miguel tactfully excused himself to attend to afternoon chores, and Alina retreated to prepare lunch, leaving Temperance alone with the sheriff. "The town's talking about you," Vincent said, leaning against the porch railing. Temperance stiffened. "I expected as much. Most folks are just curious. It's not every day a woman comes to claim a ranch and run it herself. And my clothing choices, I imagine those are being thoroughly discussed as well." Vincent's mouth quirked into that half-smile again. "Mrs. Hollister at the general store is positively scandalized. Says you're setting a dangerous precedent for the young ladies of Concordia." "And what do you think, Sheriff?" Temperance challenged. "I think," he said slowly, "that Mrs. Hollister has never had to mend fences or wrangle cattle in July. And I think you're going to surprise a lot of people in this town, Temperance Walker." Before she could respond, Alina called them for lunch. The conversation shifted to practical matters: the condition of the ranch, which cattle would be ready for market in the fall, water rights, and neighboring properties. Vincent offered information freely. answering her questions without condescension or impatience. "I should be going," he said finally, rising from the table. "Town can't sheriff itself, but if you need anything, don't hesitate to send word." Temperance walked him to his wagon, aware of Alina watching from the window with undisguised interest. "Thank you for the supplies," she said formally. "And the information." Vincent studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You know, the town social is this Saturday. Might be a good opportunity for you to meet your neighbors under more favorable circumstances than gossip at the general store." "I doubt my presence would improve anyone's social experience," Temperance replied dryly. "You might be surprised. Not everyone in Concordia is as rigid as they first appear." He climbed onto the wagon and gathered the reins. "Besides, I'll be there, and I've already proven I can tolerate your scandalous attire." Temperance couldn't help but smile at his teasing tone. "Are you formally inviting me, Sheriff Sinclair?" "I believe I am, Miss Walker." He tipped his hat. "Though I should warn you there will be dancing." With that, he clicked to the horses and drove away, leaving Temperance with the distinct impression that life in Concordia was going to be far more complicated than she'd anticipated. The days leading up to the social passed in a blur of hard work and new knowledge. Miguel was a patient teacher, and Temperance proved an apt pupil. Each evening found her exhausted but satisfied, her muscles aching from unaccustomed labor, but her mind clear in a way it hadn't been in Philadelphia. Saturday morning arrived with a dilemma she hadn't fully considered until faced with her open trunk what to wear to the social. Her practical side insisted on trousers, especially for the ride into town. But a small, traitorous part of her wondered what Vincent might think if she arrived in one of the few dresses she'd packed. "Ridiculous," she muttered to herself. "I didn't come to Kansas to impress the local lawmen." Yet as she dressed in her cleanest pair of trousers and a white blouse with a touch of lace at the collar, her one concession to the occasion, she couldn't deny that Vincent Sinclair's opinion had somehow become important to her. Alina appeared at the door just as Temperance was pinning up her hair. "Ah, you look nice," she said approvingly. "The sheriff, he will think so too." Temperance felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My appearance has nothing to do with the sheriff." Alina's knowing smile said she believed otherwise. "Miguel will drive you to town in the wagon." "It is not proper for a lady to arrive alone." "I'm perfectly capable," Temperance began. "Of course you are," Alina interrupted gently. "But some battles are worth fighting and some are not. This one, not worth it." Temperance recognized wisdom when she heard it and nodded her agreement. The social was held in the town hall, a modest building that served as church, courthouse, and community gathering place depending on the day. As Miguel's wagon approached, Temperance could hear music and laughter spilling out the open doors. Lanterns hung from the porch, casting a warm glow over the townspeople arriving in their Saturday best. "I will return at 10 to bring you home," Miguel said as he helped her down from the wagon. Temperance smoothed her blouse nervously. "Thank you, Miguel." As she approached the entrance, conversations faltered and heads turned. The music continued, but the atmosphere shifted palpably with her arrival. Temperance lifted her chin and walked forward, refusing to show how deeply the scrutiny affected her. "Miss Walker." A friendly female voice broke through the awkward silence. A pretty woman about Temperance's age approached with a warm smile. "I'm Clara Sinclair, Vincent's sister. I've been hoping to meet you." Relief washed over Temperance at the genuine welcome in Clara's voice. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Sinclair." "Just Clara, please. And don't mind the staring folks around here aren't used to new faces, especially ones that don't conform to expectation." Clara linked her arm through Temperance's and led her further into the hall. Vince told me you're taking over Jasper's ranch. That's quite an undertaking. It is, but I'm learning quickly. Your brother has been very helpful. Has he now? Clara's eyes twinkled with mischief. Vince doesn't usually take such an interest in new arrivals. He must find you particularly intriguing. Before Temperance could formulate a response that wouldn't betray her flustered state, the man in question appeared before them. Vincent was dressed in a clean shirt and vest, his badge still pinned to his chest but his usual weathered hat absent, revealing thick dark hair in need of a trim. "Clara, I see you found Miss Walker," he said, his eyes meeting Temperance's with warmth that made her pulse quicken. "I rescued her from the wolves at the door," Clara replied cheerfully. "Though I must say, she doesn't look like she needs much rescuing." Vincent's gaze traveled briefly to Temperance's trousers before returning to her face with approval. "No, she certainly doesn't." Clara excused herself to greet other arrivals, leaving Temperance alone with Vincent. The band struck up a lively tune and couples began to form for a Virginia reel. "Would you care to dance, Miss Walker?" Vincent asked, extending his hand. Temperance hesitated. "I'm not sure that would help my reputation in town." "Maybe I'm not concerned with your reputation," he replied with a grin. "Maybe I just want to dance with the most interesting woman in Concordia." Against her better judgment, Temperance placed her hand in his. "Very well, Sheriff. But don't say I didn't warn you when Mrs. Hollister faints from shock." Vincent laughed, a rich sound that sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. "I'll risk it." To Temperance's surprise, while there were certainly stares and whispers, there were also smiles and nods of greeting as Vincent led her to the dance floor. The music swept them up, and Temperance found herself laughing as they moved through the figures of the dance. Vincent was surprisingly graceful for such a tall man, and his hand at her waist guided her confidently. "You dance well for a sheriff," she commented as they circled each other. "And you dance well for a rancher," he countered, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. When the dance ended, Vincent led her to the refreshment table where they were joined by several of the town's residents. Mr. Peterson, the banker, expressed interest in her plans for the ranch. Mrs. Lewis, the doctor's wife, confided that she found corsets absolutely barbaric in the summer months. Gradually, the initial tension eased, and Temperance found herself engaged in genuine conversation. Not everyone was welcoming, of course. Mrs. Hollister and her circle maintained a cool distance, their disapproving glances making their feelings clear. But with Vincent at her side, their judgment seemed less significant than it might have otherwise. As the evening progressed, Vincent introduced her to more of the townspeople. Some were openly curious, others politely reserved, but none were outright hostile. It was more acceptance than Temperance had dared hope for. "See, not so terrible," Vincent said as they stepped outside for some air. The night was cooler, stars brilliant overhead in the clear sky. "I'm surprised," Temperance admitted. "In Philadelphia, my choices were not so tolerated." Vincent leaned against the porch railing, studying her in the lantern light. "Frontier life has a way of stripping away pretensions. Out here, what matters is whether you can pull your weight, not whether you conform to some arbitrary standard of propriety." "Is that why you've been so accepting of my unconventional ways?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Partly," he acknowledged. "But mostly it's because I judge people by their character, not their clothing. And you, Temperance Walker, have more character than most men I know." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, making her uncharacteristically speechless. Vincent seemed to understand her silence, turning his gaze to the stars to give her a moment to collect herself. "It's different here," he said quietly. "Not perfect, mind you. We have our share of small-mindedness and prejudice, but there's also a freedom in the vastness of this place. Room to be who you are without as much judgment. Is that why you stayed? Temperance asked. For the freedom, Vincent considered this. I stayed because this is home, because these people, for all their flaws, are my people. And because someone needs to keep the peace so that folks can live their lives the way they see fit, whether that's in dresses or trousers. The simple honesty of his answer touched something in Temperance she hadn't realized was lonely. In Philadelphia, she had always been fighting for respect, for autonomy, for the right to make her own choices. Here, standing beside this man who accepted her exactly as she was, she felt a curious sense of peace. The moment was broken by the arrival of Miguel, punctual as promised. Vincent walked Temperance to the wagon, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said as Miguel tactfully busied himself with the horses. "Will you ride out with me tomorrow? There's something at your property I'd like to show you." "What is it?" Vincent smiled mysteriously. "A surprise. I'll come by around noon if that suits you." Curiosity piqued, Temperance nodded her agreement. As the wagon pulled away from the town hall, she glanced back to see Vincent watching her departure, his tall figure silhouetted against the light from the doorway. Something warm unfurled in her chest, a feeling she wasn't quite ready to name but couldn't entirely ignore. The next day dawned clear and hot, the July sun relentless by mid-morning. Temperance completed her chores early, trying not to acknowledge the flutter of anticipation she felt at Vincent's impending visit. She just finished washing up when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Vincent rode up on a handsome chestnut gelding, leading a second horse, a pretty bay mare. He dismounted with easy grace and tipped his hat. "Afternoon, Miss Walker. Hope you're ready for a ride." "Where are we going?" Temperance asked, eyeing the mare with interest. "The far corner of your property. There's a spot Jasper showed me years ago that I think you should see." Vincent patted the bay's neck. "This is Penny. Jasper raised her from a foal, gentlest mare I've ever known, but with spirit when needed." "She's beautiful," Temperance said, stroking the horse's velvet nose. "She's yours," Vincent replied. "Jasper would have wanted you to have her." Touched by the gesture, Temperance mounted the mare, finding her comfortable and responsive. They rode side by side across the rolling prairie, Vincent pointing out landmarks and boundary markers as they went. The land was beautiful in its rugged way, tall grass swaying in the breeze, wildflowers dotting the landscape in bursts of color. "You ride well," Vincent observed. "Not everyone from the East takes to horseback so naturally. My father insisted I learn as a girl, before it became improper for a young lady to straddle a horse," Temperance explained. "After he died, Mother continued the lessons in his memory, despite her friends' disapproval." "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Temperance said softly. "She died 3 years ago, influenza." Vincent's expression grew somber. "I'm sorry. Losing parents is hard no matter the age." "You speak from experience," he nodded. "Lost both of mine in a fire when I was 16. Clara was 12. We were raised by our uncle after that." The shared understanding of loss created a bridge between them, deeper than the easy camaraderie they'd established before. They rode in comfortable silence until Vincent guided them toward a small rise crowned with a cluster of cottonwood trees. "There," he said, pointing. "That's what I wanted to show you." As they crested the hill, Temperance gasped. Below them stretched a hidden valley, sheltered by gentle slopes on all sides. A clear stream meandered through it, and the grass grew lush and green along its banks. Wildflowers bloomed in profusion, painting the valley floor with splashes of purple, yellow, and white. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Jasper called it Eden's Corner. Vincent said as they dismounted in the shade of the cottonwoods. Said it was the prettiest spot in Kansas territory, and I'm inclined to agree. They settled beneath the trees, Vincent producing a small picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of honey. "Did you plan this all along?" Temperance asked, accepting a slice of apple. "Maybe," he admitted with a grin. "Seemed like you could use a moment of beauty after all the hard work you've been doing." As they ate, Vincent told stories about Jasper, his stubbornness, his fairness, his occasional clashes with townspeople who didn't share his progressive views. He stood up for the Hernandez family when some folks wanted them run out of town, Vincent explained. Said Miguel was worth any 10 men who objected to his presence, and anyone who didn't like it could take their business elsewhere. That explains Alina's loyalty, Temperance mused. I wondered why they stayed after his death when they could have sought work elsewhere. Loyalty runs deep out here, Vincent said. When someone treats you with respect, you remember it. Temperance studied him thoughtfully. Is that why you've gone out of your way to help me? Out of loyalty to my uncle, Vincent met her gaze directly. I respected Jasper greatly, but that's not why I'm sitting here with you now. Then why? She pressed, her heart beating faster at the intensity in his blue eyes. Because from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, refusing to apologize for who you are, I knew you were someone special, he said simply. Someone worth knowing. The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. Temperance felt a wall inside her crumble, a wall built of years of defending herself against judgment and dismissal. Most men find my independence threatening, she said quietly. Or amusing, as if it's a phase I'll outgrow when the right man comes along to tame me. Vincent's mouth curved into a smile. I don't want to tame you, Temperance. I think you're magnificent exactly as you are. The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Temperance found herself leaning toward him almost unconsciously, drawn by the warmth in his eyes and the sincerity in his voice. Vincent reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice low. Instead of answering, Temperance closed the distance between them herself. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek with surprising tenderness. The kiss deepened, and Temperance felt something bloom inside her chest, something that felt remarkably like hope. When they finally parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the day we met, he confessed. Even in my scandalous trousers, she teased. Especially in your scandalous trousers, he replied with a laugh. You have no idea how refreshing it is to meet a woman who values practicality over convention. They stayed in the valley until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, talking about everything and nothing: their childhoods, their dreams, the books they'd read, the places they'd seen. Vincent spoke of his hope for Concordia's future as the territory moved toward statehood, and Temperance shared her vision for making the ranch thrive. As they rode back to the cabin, side by side in the golden light of late afternoon, Temperance felt a certainty settling over her. Whatever happened next, coming to Kansas had been the right decision. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm. Mornings were for ranch work with Miguel. Afternoons often included Vincent when his duties allowed, and evenings were for planning and sometimes socializing. Gradually, Temperance found herself accepted by more of the townspeople. Her trousers remained a topic of discussion, but increasingly it was with curiosity rather than condemnation. Clara became a fast friend, visiting the ranch regularly and sharing stories of growing up with Vincent that made Temperance laugh until her sides ached. Through Clara, she met other women in town who were less conventional than they first appeared: the doctor's wife, who secretly practiced medicine alongside her husband. The widowed Mrs. Torres, who ran the town's only restaurant with an iron will and shrewd business sense. Young Miss Jenkins, who dreamed of becoming a lawyer and devoured every legal text she could find. Vincent was a constant presence, helping with ranch matters, bringing news from town, or simply sitting on her porch in the evening, discussing the day's events. Their kisses became more frequent, their connection deepening with each passing day. When Vincent was called away to escort a prisoner to Topeka, the 3 days of his absence felt interminably long. On a particularly scorching day in early August, Temperance was checking fence lines on the far side of the property when she spotted smoke rising in the distance. Heart racing, she urged Penny toward it, fearing a prairie fire that could destroy everything in its path. As she crested a hill, she saw the source, a small homesteader's cabin engulfed in flames. A woman stood outside, clutching a baby to her chest and screaming toward the burning structure. "My son," she cried when she saw Temperance. "My boy's still inside." Without hesitation, Temperance dismounted and ran toward the cabin, tying her bandana over her nose and mouth. The heat was intense, the smoke thick and choking. She dropped to her knees, crawling below the worst of the smoke, and called out. A small voice answered from the back room. Following the sound, Temperance found a boy of about 5 huddled beneath a bed, paralyzed with fear. "Come on, sweetheart," she coaxed, extending her hand. "We need to go now." The boy shook his head, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. Behind them, something crashed as part of the roof began to give way. "I'm scared," the boy whispered. "I know you are," Temperance said, forcing calm into her voice. "But I'm going to keep you safe. I promise." She reached under the bed and pulled him into her arms, holding him close as she navigated back through the burning cabin. The front door was now partially blocked by fallen debris. Temperance turned and kicked out a window instead, lifting the boy through it first before climbing out herself just as another section of the roof collapsed. The mother fell to her knees, clutching both children as tears streamed down her face. "Thank you," she repeated over and over. "God bless you." Temperance helped the family onto Penny and led them back to her ranch, the mother explaining between sobs that her husband was away working on the railroad and due back in a week. The fire had started when a lamp was knocked over, and with the drought conditions, it had spread rapidly. By the time they reached the cabin, word had somehow spread to town. Vincent arrived with the doctor close behind, followed by several wagons of townspeople bringing supplies and offers of help. "Are you all right?" Vincent demanded, his face pale with worry as he took in her soot-stained appearance and singed clothing. "I'm fine," Temperance assured him, though her throat felt raw from the smoke. "She saved my Jimmy," the young mother, who had introduced herself as Sarah Miller, told Vincent. "Ran right into the burning house without a thought for herself." Vincent's expression was a mixture of pride and lingering fear. "That sounds like Temperance," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Bravest woman I know." Dr. Lewis insisted on examining both Temperance and the Miller children, declaring them smoke-exposed but otherwise unharmed. The women of the town organized temporary housing for the Millers with the widow Torres, while the men discussed rebuilding the cabin. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the Millers were settled in town, Vincent sat with Temperance on her porch, his hand holding hers tightly as if afraid she might disappear. "You could have been killed today," he said quietly. "I couldn't leave that child to die," Temperance replied simply. "I know." Vincent brought her hand to his lips. "It's one of the reasons I love you." The words hung in the air between them, both startling and somehow inevitable. Temperance turned to look at him, finding his gaze steady and certain. "You love me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I thought possible," he confirmed. "When I heard about the fire, about you running in, I realized I can't imagine my life without you in it, Temperance Walker. I don't want to." Temperance felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming certainty that filled her heart. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have almost from the beginning." Vincent cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that spilled onto her cheeks. "Then marry me," he said. "Be my wife, my partner, my equal in all things. You'd marry a woman who refuses to wear dresses and runs into burning buildings?" she asked, a tremulous smile forming. "I wouldn't have you any other way," he replied, his eyes shining with sincerity. "Wear what makes you comfortable, Temperance. Just promise to wear my ring while you do it." Instead of answering with words, Temperance leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her love and certainty into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she whispered, "Yes." The news of their engagement spread through Concordia like wildfire. Most reactions were positive. Clara was ecstatic, the Hernandez family delighted, and many of the townspeople genuinely happy for their sheriff. Some, predictably, were scandalized by the match, but Vincent and Temperance found they cared less and less about those opinions. The wedding was set for October, when the worst of the summer heat would have passed and the fall cattle drive would be complete. In the meantime, life continued. The ranch demanded attention. Vincent's duties as sheriff kept him busy, and decisions needed to be made about their future. "Will we live here or in town?" Temperance asked one evening as they discussed plans. "I've been thinking about that," Vincent replied. "What if we build a new place, halfway between? I can still reach town quickly if needed, but we'd have the privacy of the ranch. And the ranch itself remains yours," he said firmly. "I don't want to take over what Jasper left you. We can run it together, but it stays in your name." The certainty with which he respected her independence only confirmed what Temperance already knew: she had found a truly exceptional man. September brought cooler temperatures, and the cattle drive to the railhead in Abilene. Temperance rode alongside Miguel and the hired hands, her skills with the herd now confident and sure. Vincent met them in Abilene for the sale, standing proud as Temperance negotiated favorable prices with the buyers. On the return journey, they stopped at the spot where Temperance had rescued the Miller family. The cabin was rebuilt now, stronger than before, with the combined effort of many Concordia residents. Sarah Miller embraced Temperance tightly, little Jimmy clinging to her legs. "We can never repay you," Sarah said, eyes bright with emotion. "But we named the new baby after you, Temperance Joy Miller. Hope you don't mind." "I'm honored," Temperance replied honestly, touched beyond words by the gesture. As October approached, preparations for the wedding accelerated. Clara helped Temperance with arrangements, insisting on handling many details to allow the bride time to focus on the ranch. "Have you decided what to wear?" Clara asked one afternoon as they sorted through fabrics at the general store. Temperance hesitated. "I've been thinking about that. Part of me feels I should wear a traditional dress for Vincent's sake. But it wouldn't be you," Clara finished for her. "And my brother fell in love with you, not some frilly version of you in clothes that make you uncomfortable." Mrs. Hollister, overhearing as she arranged nearby bolts of cloth, sniffed disapprovingly. "A bride in trousers. What is the world coming to?" Clara turned to the older woman with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A world where women make their own choices, Mrs. Hollister. Imagine that." The day before the wedding, Vincent came to the ranch with a small package. "A gift for tomorrow," he said, placing it in Temperance's hands. Inside was a beautiful silver brooch in the shape of a wild prairie rose. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Clara and I saved it from the fire. I'd like you to wear it tomorrow if you wish." "It's beautiful," Temperance said, deeply moved by the significance of the gift. "I'll treasure it always." Vincent smiled, his eyes warm with love. "I want you to know that I meant what I said that first day. Wear what makes you comfortable tomorrow. I'm marrying you for who you are, not what you wear." Temperance kissed him softly. "Thank you for always seeing me, truly seeing me." The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the prairie ablaze with autumn colors. The ceremony was to be held on the ranch, under the cottonwood trees where they had first kissed. Townspeople began arriving early, bringing food and flowers, setting up tables and chairs borrowed from the town hall. In the cabin, Clara helped Temperance prepare. Her wedding outfit was a compromise of sorts, not a traditional dress, but beautifully tailored trousers in soft cream-colored fabric, paired with a matching fitted jacket over a silk blouse. Vincent's mother's brooch was pinned at her throat, and her hair was arranged in soft waves framing her face. "You look beautiful," Clara said, blinking back tears. "Absolutely perfect." A knock at the door revealed Alina holding a small bunch of wildflowers. "For your hair," she explained, "and to tell you the guests are ready." As Temperance stepped outside, she was overwhelmed by the sight that greeted her. It seemed the entire town of Concordia had turned out, filling the chairs arranged in front of an arch of autumn branches and flowers. But it was Vincent who captured her attention, completely standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his face lighting up as he saw her. The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt. Judge Anderson, who had been a friend of Jasper's, officiated with warmth and humor. When it came time for the vows, Vincent's voice was steady and sure. "Temperance Walker, I take you as you are, strong, brave, and true. I promise to stand beside you as your equal, to support your dreams as my own, to love you through all seasons of our life together. I will never ask you to be less than who you are, only to share who you are with me, every day of our lives." Temperance's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "Vincent Sinclair, I choose you freely and joyfully. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face life's challenges at your side, to cherish the love we've found in this unexpected place. You saw me when others looked away, loved me without condition, and in you I have found not just love, but home." When Judge Anderson pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all the days to come. The cheers and applause that erupted around them included even Mrs. Hollister, who was discreetly wiping away a tear. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing under the stars and enough food to feed the entire county. As night fell, lanterns were lit, casting a magical glow over the gathering. Vincent and Temperance danced together, oblivious to the admiring glances around them. "Happy, Mrs. Sinclair," Vincent murmured against her ear. "Deliriously," she replied, savoring the new name that represented not a surrender of her identity but an expansion of it. "Though I may still use Walker for ranch business if you don't mind." "Whatever makes you comfortable," he said with a smile, echoing the words that had first opened her heart to him. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." As the last guests departed and quiet settled over the ranch, Vincent and Temperance stood together on the porch, looking out at the vast prairie under the brilliant canopy of stars. "I never expected this," Temperance admitted softly. "When I came to Kansas, I was only looking for independence, for a place to belong on my own terms. I never imagined I'd find you." Vincent drew her close, his arms warm and secure around her waist. "And I never imagined that a woman in trousers stepping off a stagecoach would change my life forever. But here we are." "Here we are," she agreed, turning in his embrace to face him. and here we'll stay." Their kiss was a promise of love, of partnership, of a future built on mutual respect and understanding. As Vincent lifted her into his arms to carry her over the threshold of what was now their home, Temperance knew with absolute certainty that she had found everything she'd ever wanted and more in Concordia, Kansas. 1 year later, Temperance stood on the porch of their new home, watching as Vincent rode up the path with the mail from town. The house sat exactly halfway between the ranch and Concordia, as they'd planned a beautiful 2-story structure with wide porches and ample windows to catch the prairie breezes. In the corral nearby, Miguel was working with a spirited young colt while Alina played with little James Vincent Sinclair, their 3-month-old son, who already showed signs of having his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. The ranch had prospered under their joint management, with Temperance's education and Vincent's practical knowledge combining to introduce new breeding stock and improved grazing practices. Vincent continued his duties as sheriff, though he'd trained a deputy to handle routine matters, allowing him more time at home. "Letter from Clara," Vincent announced as he dismounted, "and one from Sarah Miller." Temperance accepted both, her face lighting up. Clara had moved to Lawrence to attend the state university, one of the few that accepted women, and her letters were always full of excitement about her studies and the interesting people she was meeting. Sarah's letter would contain news of little Temperance Joy, now walking and talking, and updates on the Miller family's thriving homestead. After the fire, the community had come together not just to rebuild their cabin, but to help them expand their farm. The Millers had become dear friends, with Sarah often joining Temperance in her more progressive views about women's capabilities. "Any other news from town?" Temperance asked as Vincent scooped up their son, tossing him gently in the air to make him giggle. "Mrs. Hollister asked after you," Vincent replied with a grin. "Said to tell you she stocked those work boots you wanted, though she still doesn't understand why any woman needs boots that sturdy." Temperance laughed. "Some things never change." "And some things do," Vincent said, his expression growing more serious as he gazed at their son. "When I think about what our boy will grow up seeing his mother running a ranch, making her own decisions, wearing whatever she pleases, I can't help but believe the world he inherits will be better for it. Perhaps he'll marry a woman in trousers someday," Temperance teased. "If she's half the woman his mother is, he'll be a lucky man indeed." Vincent leaned down to kiss her softly. "You've changed more than just my life, you know. The women in town look at you and see possibilities they never considered before." It was true. In the past year, Temperance had noticed subtle shifts in Concordia. Mrs. Lewis now openly assisted her husband in his practice, acknowledged as Dr. Lewis Associate rather than simply his wife. The school board had hired a female principal from back east, partly on Temperance's recommendation. Even Mrs. Hollister had reluctantly begun stocking more practical women's clothing alongside the traditional dresses. "We're making progress, one small step at a time," Temperance agreed. "Though I sometimes wish it moved faster." Vincent shifted their son to one arm, using his free hand to tuck a strand of hair behind Temperance's ear in a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. "Change worth having often comes slowly, but it does come." That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, little James sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them, Temperance reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the moment she'd stepped off that stagecoach in her scandalous trousers to now a ranch owner, a wife, a mother, and increasingly, a respected voice in the community, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, his hand finding hers in the gathering dusk. "About how one small choice can change everything," she replied. "If I'd worn a dress that first day, would we be sitting here now?" Vincent considered this. "I'd like to think so, but I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you had the courage to be exactly who you are from the very beginning." Temperance leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her like the golden light of the setting sun. "Wear what makes you comfortable," she murmured, repeating his words from long ago. "Best advice I ever took." "And the best advice I ever gave," Vincent agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "because it brought me you." As darkness settled over the prairie and stars began to appear in the vast Kansas sky, Temperance Sinclair knew she had found not just a place to belong, but a love that accepted her completely, trousers and all.